evening, everybody, and welcome to the Children's Education and Housing Scrutiny Committee for this evening. Do we have any apologies? The Children's Education and Housing.
Yes, through you, Chair. We have apologies for non-attendance from Councillor Fiona Baker, with Councillor Alison Eastwood substituting for her. We also have apologies for non-attendance from Melanie Barnett, the Director of Children's Services, and Jane Carr, the Corporate Director, Housing and Communities.
Thank you, James. Moving on to item 2, declarations of interest. I'd like to ask the committee, do we have any declarations of interest, please? No. Thank you. So moving on to item 3, the minutes. Are you happy for me to sign the minutes as a correct record from our last meeting? Thank you. So moving on to item 4, that's me. So announcements. Could I ask everybody to turn your phones to silence or turn them off if you think you may receive a call or any vibrations during our meeting? This is being live webcammed over on YouTube, so could I ask all people that wish to speak if we could speak clearly into the microphone? Thank you. We have had some committee changes. We have had Councillor Owens, Tony Owens, who has gone over to the Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee. So I'd like to thank him for his contribution to our committee here whilst he was on it. And also we welcome Councillor Cameron Henry. And we hope you have a good meeting. And Colin as our first meeting. Thank you. So we swiftly now move on to the call-in. And then over to you, James, to introduce it to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So call-in is the statutory function that enables an executive decision, a decision taken by the Cabinet, to be called in for scrutiny before being enacted. In this case, the decision in question relates to the Cabinet meeting on the 9th of June and the decision to approve the proposed private rented sector discharge policy. So the agenda papers, starting page 15 of your pack, set out the relevant extract from the Council's constitution relating to the call-in process, the call-in notice that was submitted to the monitoring officer, and the original Cabinet report. Just in terms of the process to be followed by the committee tonight, firstly, the call-in originator, who in this case is Councillor Keeble, will be invited to address the committee on the reasons for the call-in and the requested action. There are then a number of other councillors who have signed the call-in notice who've also asked to address the committee. After that, the committee will hear comments from the Cabinet Member for Housing and Communities and relevant service officers, and the committee should then move into a discussion on the arguments heard and a potential resolution by the committee. The potential resolution by the committee in this case are essentially one of two things. If the committee has concerns about the original decision, having heard the arguments for and against, it can refer the decision back to the Cabinet for reconsideration. And if it does this, it should set out the nature of the committee's concerns and any alternative recommendations that the committee proposes. On the other hand, if the committee effectively has no concerns or decides that's the case, it can resolve to take no further action. And if the committee reaches that resolution, then the original decision taken by the Cabinet takes effect immediately. So, as I say, Chair, the agenda papers include the relevant section from the Constitution. Happy to take any questions about the process, if there are any.
Okay, I take that as a no. So I'd like to invite Councillor Sally Keeble to speak to us. Thank you.
Right, let's go back and try this one. Good. Right. Thank you, Chair. First off, I just want to set the record straight a bit, because yesterday I was lambasted by the Leader of the Council on local radio for having done nothing about this in my 13 years as an MP. So I should clarify, I was a housing minister who, among other things, took through Parliament the Homelessness Act 2002, the strengthened protection for homeless people, and who also, I was a housing minister who issued the guidance that obliged councils to take families with children out of bed and breakfast accommodation, and who also issued the guidance that strengthened protections for sons and daughters, as providing the local connections that are one of the building blocks of sound communities. So that is a bit more than doing nothing. There are 2 points to what I'm going to say, and they will cover the points of the call-in notice. I'll refer to some of the points in detail, but there are also some wider points to make in support. One set of points about justification for the policy, whether it's necessary or a good idea in the first place, and whether any alternatives are open to adopting what would be one of the hardest line out-of-area placement, private rented sector first policies of any local authority. And this is not about temporary housing. This is about discharge of the main housing duty. So it is about making sure that people have a proper place that they can call home. The second is a detail of the policy as it's set out here, and whether it's actually fit for purpose or should go back and be looked at again. First, on the justification. This is important because West Northants has always been a place that has attracted inward migration. It was a new town. It's economically successful. It needs people, and it relies on people coming and building up our town. And it is mostly about Northampton homelessness and making it successful. The combination of a job and a home was transformative and still is, and it was even more transformative when a former Conservative government let people buy their council homes. It still works, that combination of work and home, just about, because housing costs are reasonable in comparison to the overheated south, and employers locate here because of a good supply of labour prepared to work for modest wages and who are reliable and stable because they have homes. See the new warehouses which are going up around Junction 15 and elsewhere. This policy that you're looking at here ends the Northampton dream. It used to be come here to work, stay to live. But this policy would effectively end the link between a job and help from the private sector, from the public sector in getting a home. And it also risks moving people out of the area if they get into difficulties with their housing. And it won't solve any housing crisis. The best way to solve a housing crisis is to build housing, especially social and affordable housing. And this council has turned down a good number of applications for affordable and social housing. That's not just council housing, of course, that's also housing association housing. No justification is provided for this policy. Homelessness rates here are dramatically less than the other councils that have implemented policies of this type of PRS first policies with out-of-area placements. For example, If you look at government figures, about 1 person in 261 in West Northants is homeless, compared with 1 in 56 in Ealing. No justification is provided on financial grounds. There's no benchmarking of current costs of temporary accommodation, no estimate of the additional cost of private sector leasing if that was to be used. There's no information about any additional costs to the council of supporting people to move across the country, or of the rent support that they might need to enable them to remain in a private sector tenancy. And you have to bear in mind that a lot of people who are coming into, who become homeless in West Northamptonshire do so because they have a failed private sector tenancy. If you want some alternatives that might ease cost pressures, you could look at your temporary housing strategies. At present, the council uses a disproportionately high number of social housing units, your own council homes for temporary housing, which is cheap in the short term, but not sustainable in the longer term. And you're also using a relatively high proportion of expensive nightly paid accommodation. You could easily increase private sector leasing, working perhaps with some good private sector providers. So this covers grounds 1, 2 and 5 of the call-in notice. Now to turn to the second issue, which is the detail of the policy. And in this, I have to say, the policy document is a complete disaster. It does not set out anything like the level of detail that's required to make a policy that's reasonable or workable. And if you compare it with other council policies, it's seriously deficient. And that's important when it comes to people being able to exercise their right to review, or if they exercise a legal challenge against your policies. If this policy goes through, private sector rental will be used as the usual tenure for placement of homeless people at any stage of the process, at the early stage or at the final duty stage. In most cases, that means, and it will also be used, it can be used without their consent. That's clear from paragraph 4.6. So this isn't just putting them into private homes on a temporary basis. This is to discharge the main housing duty, and it can be out of area. So it will be everyone unless they are exempt for some reason. So who will be exempt? What are the, as you quote, clear and evidence and documented reasons that this would not be suitable for them? It doesn't say it here. It does in some of the other council's policy documents. Private sector rents in Northampton are well above the local housing allowance. So what will you do about affordability? These aspects are considered in other councils' documents, but in ours is just a run-through of some headings in paragraph 6.3, and no more than that. Even worse is the lack of detail about out-of-area placements. If you look at other councils, and Croydon's a good example, they set out where they will send people to and the type of factors that will be taken into consideration, whether it's in Croydon, outside of Croydon, but within London or beyond. They also set out the factors that would be taken into consideration and who would be most likely to be moved. You have done none of that. It has to be assumed that you'll be sending people to cheaper places, given the aim is to reduce costs. So you can't even send people to somewhere like Milton Keynes, where housing costs, and we're talking about rentals, are higher. You'll have to send them up north. To where? To Doncaster, perhaps, or to Durham. London councils have sent people up to 120 miles. So where will you send people to? It's not clear. What then will you do, for example, about send considerations for families that have got children with special needs? Education needs. Bear in mind that 32% of our homeless people are families with children. Health, including mental health and disability needs. 17% of our homeless people have a disability or long-term illness. Caring responsibility, support networks. 30% of our homeless people are living with families. The sons and daughters, which, as I said before, are the bedrock of community, and I'm sure everybody here knows some sons and daughters who stay with their family members in the council flat until they have to move out, and then, until they want to move out and find a home of their own. Now, it can be into a private sector place, it can be out of the area, out of the county. Employment needs, because bear in mind, 26% of Northampton's homeless people, West Northampton I should say, homeless people are in full or part-time jobs, well above the national average, and because that's Northampton. People here work, they have homes, they have families, they look after them, they care about their community. All of these factors which I've listed are included in other councils' policy documents, but they're not set out in ours. In 7.3 you say that there's been an equality impact assessment. Where is it? And I have to ask that since this is a Reform UK Council, your leader, Nigel Farage, this month said he would ban foreign nationals from living in social housing and require foreign nationals already in social housing to move into private rented accommodation within 3 months. And I sincerely hope that this council...
Councillor Keeble, can I just ask you to clarify the relevance of that please?
Yes, I will.
We're not here to be overly political. We're here to think of West Northamptonshire and our residents.
I'm absolutely thinking of West Northamptonshire and our residents. The relevance of it is that you have not set out the criteria that you will use to force people, because it will be without their consent, into private accommodation or move them out of the area. And since you've not set it, anything is possible. And what I'm asking you is to rule that one very clearly out. And if people are offered a place in, say, Doncaster or Durham, how will they exercise their right of review? Will they be able to stay here while they do so right through stage 1, stage 2, and through the Ombudsman, which can take a good number of years? Or will they have to move up there? And if they move up there and the tenancy breaks down, will you help them come back home? And if they come back home, will they still be regarded as having local connections here, which is the only way that they would be able to reapply for social housing? There are other elements that are missing too.
Could I ask you to summarise, please? Thank you.
I've very nearly finished, but I was told that there was no time limit and that I could speak to the points. There are other elements that are missing. Ground 6 of the call-in deals with transparency and openness, yet the operational procedures and the placements policies aren't included in the document. They are in other local authorities' documents. And the information about regulatory regimes is also missing, perhaps because the regulatory regimes themselves are missing. Decent Home Standard doesn't apply to the private sector, not till 2035. There's no universal private sector ombudsman in place yet. And what about the monitoring, the transparency about who is being moved and to where? How will that work? This, which is set out here, is a massive departure for housing policy. It's not just about temporary housing. It puts West Northamptonshire in line with those big towns and cities, especially London, that have a much bigger housing crisis, but it does so with a totally inadequate policy. It gives no adequate justification for the policies, no financial costings, and no alternative options. But even if, with all these shortcomings, the Council still wanted to proceed, the policy document itself is lacking in any of the detail a reasonable and workable policy should contain. So, as a call-in notice has set out clearly, this is why we're asking for it to go back and be considered in more detail. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Keeble. Can I invite Councillor Julie Davenport, please, to come and speak to us? Thank you. Just want to take this opportunity to remind all councillors speaking that you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
3. Okay. This really feels like déjà vu. We've been here before. Some years ago, Northampton Borough Council proposed a social lettings agency. It sounded like an excellent idea. We were told private landlords were interested, that it would increase the supply of affordable homes and reduce the pressure on temporary accommodation. But every time councillors ask, when will it begin? The launch date slipped further and further back. In the end, only one landlord signed up, and the scheme could never get off the ground. Now, today, the challenge is even greater. The reason so many households are applying for housing from the council is simple. Families cannot afford private rents of around £1,300 a month for a 3-bed property. Even when they can, they have little security of tenure, leaving already vulnerable families living with constant uncertainty. Yet the solution before us appears to rely on placing more homeless households into the same expensive private rented sector, often with only 12 months tenancy. If a homeless household refuse what the council considers a suitable offer, they risk losing the housing duty owed to them, regardless of where that property is. That could mean families being forced to move away from children's schools, relative friends, and vital support networks. Yes, there is a right to request a review, but in my experience, those reviews can take time, prolonging uncertainty and homelessness. They are also rarely successful unless significant new evidence is produced, even though the applicants have usually already submitted everything they have. Now, if this proposal generally succeeds where previous scheme failed, I will, be the first to welcome it. But scrutiny is about asking for evidence before we hand over delegated authority. How many landlords have actually expressed an interest? What evidence do we have this scheme is deliverable? What confidence do we have that this will not repeat of mistakes of the past? This proposal also relies on financial guarantees, yet the discretionary housing fund is already under
Councillor
pressure.
Davenport, could I ask you to summarise now? Thank you, because it's been 3 minutes. I know, it goes quick, doesn't it, once you're speaking? Thank you.
Oh, gosh. So the biggest problem, not only for the tenants, but is for the landlords, that what they don't like is the risk that this kind of scheme makes them face. So are they going to take on a tenant not knowing what guarantees there are? And if there are guarantees, will we give a guarantee that if the people can't afford the rent, that we will pay for eviction fees? Because I don't know, I cannot see, landlords weren't interested before, and I'm not sure. And if the policy is robust, scrutiny will strengthen it. If it's not, scrutiny gives us the opportunity to improve it before vulnerable families face the consequences. And for those reasons, I ask colleagues to support this call-in. I mean, what have we got to lose?
Sorry, Councillor, you've had far longer than 3 minutes now. Can we wrap up, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Davenport. I'm going to ask Councillor Keith Holland-Delamere to come and speak to us. Thank you.
over the years, I've had experience of inter-department ping pong within WNC and also inter-council ping pong. And I'm reminded of a case that I had to deal with in the July summer of 2024, where another local authority had discharged their duty by housing a family in accommodation in our area. And they'd been in this temporary housing within private sector housing for 18 months. And then they were told to move on. And I had to go and deal with this case. And what was shocking is because they'd been out of the area where they were from for 18 months, it's not our responsibility. But there was family involved. There was a family involved. And there were two children who basically needed accommodation for the night. So you then had inter-department ping pong. So you make a saving in the housing budget, and because you've got family involved, you end up having to get Northamptonshire Children's Trust to pay for the accommodation, overnight accommodation for this family. So you shift it from one budget to another budget. So you make a saving with one hand, and then you end up costing yourself with another hand. And I've had this experience before with various cases where a decision about accommodation means that you end up having to have home to school transport for someone because you've housed them out of the area, and because they've got SEND needs, basically they need that connection to the local school. So you end up having to pay for home to school transport. But of course that's time limited. And if they've decided to move out of the area because basically they've been given no choice, okay, so what do? You move the child from a place where they've been settled
1 minute left, Councillor.
into a housing that's out of their area where they have a real problem about their mental health, their settled status, their education. So for me, what I find really quite disturbing is, has the policy taken into considerations the impact on other budgets for our council? Because it's all very well making a saving in one area, but if you haven't got a tight policy, you end up causing problems in other areas. And I'm not confident that we've taken into consideration those additional costs.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor Bob Purser to come and speak to us next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak. And I'm speaking in favour of the committee giving further consideration to this matter in detail and calling it in to look at that. I've got three reasons. Firstly, it's important, with policies as important as this, with the implications that it has, it's important that they come to committee for scrutiny before they come to Cabinet. When something comes to Cabinet, it is really too late to have the debate or discussion about it. So really, this committee should have seen this policy first, given its importance and significance. The second point is that that the committee should, and the council and the cabinet should be considering the impact of this on its most vulnerable residents. This is a policy that affects people who are the most vulnerable in our community. I'm concerned about the impact of people who will be sent out of area, that we have no criteria for that. It's very much a policy that tells us what we as a council are not doing rather than what we are doing. And I'd have thought that a positive policy saying what our obligations are rather than stating what we're trying to avoid doing. So that's my second point. The third point is that is a real concern that this puts the council even more in reliance on the private sector for housing. Now, we've learnt to our cost the implications of our children's services having to rely on private sector provision. we're learning increasingly about the impact on adult services of private sector provision. And here, we're moving further into that with our private sector housing area.
1 minute, Councillor.
So this has come to bite us in the backside before, and I suggest it will come, and it will come again. We have to look very seriously about the priority has to increase the public housing stock so that we're not more and more reliant on our private sector housing. So I think a lot of more work has got to be done on this policy before, to me, it is an acceptable policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask Councillor Jonathan Harris to come and address the committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth this committee just clarifying the point on the Constitution about call-in. I can't see any specific reference to 3 minutes. Maybe Chair's decision to do that, but I can't see anything specific in the Constitution that limits it to 3 minutes. I'm here to speak in support of this call-in also. I too have concerns relating to this policy and echo a number of my colleagues' points that have already been made. It's not in regard to the legalities around it at all, but on some specific areas where it's extremely light. We've had, for instance, a work going on temporary accommodation, interim homes, for several years now, and it's still failed to deliver. I keep being told it's due any time. That's the solution. We should be looking at what we do within our area and not looking out with. On the issue of out-of-area placement specifically, which is section 9 in the policy, it's extremely scant. So much so that if you do a quick desktop exercise looking at many other councils, you'll find some really strong examples of this policy. Oxford City, St Albans, Coventry, West Suffolk, Stevenage, which also, I would add, makes specific reference to the council's legal duties under the Public Sector Equality Duty. 9.3 of this policy is particularly scant. In the West Suffolk policy, there is a specific policy section which explores in detail the whole scenario and situation from the perspective of an applicant or an individual. 496 words setting out what needs to be thought about and considered. We effectively have deduced that 20 will suffice. The St Albans policy also clearly sets out a mapped catchment area. So there is no such thing as you can go wherever we deem to send you. There is a very clear set out catchment area, so you can't be sent to Bolton, you will be sent within a reasonable distance. Councillor Keeble made some comments earlier on which you interjected and deemed to be political. Well, they are political, unfortunately, because this whole process has been politicised. I noticed.
1 minute, Councillor.
I don't know why you keep saying it's not on topic.
Because we're not here to discuss
If the council leader wants to go on the radio to politicise an issue such as this
isn't a radio.
Others will politicise it.
I actually just want to make this apolitical, please.
Really? Good.
Thank you.
Well, let me remind you
We're here for the residents of West Northampton.
Indeed,
this is a scrutiny committee, and this committee is apolitical.
Indeed, thank you. So it was stated that the paper is as it is and no changes will be made. Frankly, that's not anyone's decision to make other than your own. Your role is to act as an independent oversight scrutiny committee. So it's a shame that we didn't hear that. It's a shame that we didn't hear. Let's see what representations we get made to the committee. How can we add value to this policy? How can we make it even better than the one that we have in front of us? I'm sure you don't need reminding that call-in is a perfectly legitimate process for any group of members to undertake if they believe that a decision has been taken in haste, has gaps, or has been done without due thought. A reminder, it is a valid democratic process. So please, You don't want to politicise it. We don't want to politicise it either. So please listen to the arguments, review this policy. It is not fit for purpose.
Thank you. I'm going to ask our last speaker to come forth, and that is Councillor Fatoon Ismail, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is, I have a question on point 2.1. My question is, what is the council's long-term plan to increase the supply of sustainable housing, social housing for homeless people? It is 1 year down the line, or more than 1 year down the line, and we don't have anything on record. While I understand the need to meet statutory homeless duties, I'm concerned that this policy focuses on managing homelessness rather than solving it. Residents are affected by the cost of living crisis and ongoing high inflation that should be at the center of the council's housing policy. When implementing a private rented sector discharge policy, it will not reduce homelessness in the long term. Instead, it will risk moving homeless people from temporary accommodation into another form of insecure housing. There is a reality that many private landlords will be unwilling to rent to people at a reasonable rental charges. Even where accommodation is available, it will not be suitable or affordable in the long term. I'm now concerned about housing standards in regards to this policy. We have all seen the poor conditions that some people experience in HMOs, including lack of maintenance, weak enforcement. If the council is going to rely more heavily on private rented sector, how can it guarantee that vulnerable households will not simply be moved into poor quality accommodation? Finally, I would ask what evidence the council has that this policy is appropriate for our county. We do not face exactly the same homelessness pressure as every authority that has adopted a similar approach. So what assessment has been carried out to show this policy is the right solution for our residents? And also, because we are talking about homeless people who we want to help them secure where to live, did we include them in this policy making, if at all you want to help the homeless people? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to invite Councillor Charlie Hastie and also our officers to present to us and to thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all colleagues for, firstly, all the effort they put in and comprehensive questioning, and for the outlining of how we're to review this policy tonight. Councillor Keeble was looking at going through 1, 2 and 5, I believe, and then 3, 4 and 6 separately. So what I wanted to do, first of all, if I may, is just give, for the benefit of the committee, just a little bit of an overview about the discharge policy as I understand it. Then we'll go through, if I may, the grounds 1 through 6, but I will try and apportion them in the same way that you, Councillor Keeble was looking at addressing them. Then a summary, but then I will ask, I may refer, because there are a lot of questions there. I think I've got a lot down, officers have got some down, but I will try and come back to everyone's answers accordingly. So this may take a little bit of time, so please, committee and colleagues, bear with me. Okay, so the PRS discharge policy reflects established best practice within the sector by making full and lawful use of the powers available under the Localism Act 2011 to end the main homelessness duty through a suitable private rented sector offer by clearly setting out how suitability, affordability, location and support needs are assessed. The policy provides a transparent and consistent decision-making framework that is aligned to the statutory guidance and case law. This ensures that decisions are evidence-based, proportionate and defensible, reducing the risk of successful challenge. Importantly, it creates a robust audit trail demonstrating that each discharge has been properly considered against individual circumstances, which is critical in responding to ombudsman complaints or judicial review proceedings. In this way, the policy not only supports the effective use of limited housing supply and reduces reliance on temporary accommodation, but also provides council with a clear, lawful and well-governed framework that can withstand external scrutiny. I presume everyone is well grounded in the actual individual grounds for it, so I'm not going to refer back to the individual grounds. I'm just going to give my response to them. So, ground one, consultation and scrutiny. It is correct that this policy was not taken through pre-decision scrutiny, and I recognise that members would have valued that opportunity. However, the policy does not introduce new powers. It sets out how the Council will apply long-standing statutory provisions, including the ability to discharge duty into the private rented sector, which are already available to all local authorities. In summary on this point, given this is an operational policy setting out existing powers rather than new policy direction, it was considered proportionate to proceed without pre-decision scrutiny. Moving on to 3. If I've got the right order of that, 1, 4 and 5, I think it was Councillor Keeble, wasn't it? 3, 4 and 6. 3, 4 and 6. 1, 2 and 5. Sorry, let's go back to that one. I'm going to go back to 2. Ground 2, financial analysis and best value. It is fair to say that the financial section of the report could have been more detailed, and that is something we can and have strengthened. We need to be explicit that this is not financially driven. However, it is important to recognise that councils must balance their statutory duties with the effective use of resources. The use of the private rented sector is a recognised and established approach to managing demand and reducing reliance on temporary accommodation. And obviously temporary accommodation is just not a suitable outcome for residents. The policy is therefore not solely financially driven, but seeks to balance demand, resources and improved outcomes for households. While financial pressures are a reality, this policy is not about cost avoidance. It is about achieving sustainable, lawful outcomes for residents. So moving on to 5, proportionality and default route. Now, I do think this is a fair challenge, although the current wording does give the impression that PRS is the default route, and I agree that this can and should be clearer within the policy and will be. The intention is not to create a blanket approach which would not be lawful, but to ensure that all available housing options, including PRS, are considered appropriately and consistently based on individual housing circumstances. A blanket approach would be unlawful, and this policy does not permit one. We will revise the wording to make clear that decisions are made on a case-by-case basis, with suitability remaining the determining factor. So coming back to the other points in 3, 4 and 6. Point 3, equality and human rights and assessment, and the role of the policy will be reviewed after 12 months of adoption to assess equality impacts across the usage of this policy. However, it is important to be clear that the legal duty under the Equality Act is to have due regard to these factors in decision-making. In practice, this is delivered through individual suitability assessments, which take account of each household's circumstances, needs, risks and support requirements. This policy does not remove any of those statutory duties or safeguards, and all decisions remain subject to statutory review. This is ensuring vulnerable households are not placed inappropriately or disconnected from essential support. And we go on to 4. Relevant considerations, tenancy ending. Households are not left without recourse if a tenancy ends. There are clear statutory protections in place, and any subsequent approach for assistance would be assessed in line with the Council's homelessness duties at that time, including circumstances where duties may arise. It is also important to note that all placements, including those outside the area, must meet the the legal test of suitability. This includes consideration of location, access to employment, education, support networks, and individual household circumstances. In response to concerns raised, we will strengthen the policy to provide greater clarity on how reasonable, practical, and location decisions are applied in practice to provide additional assurance to members. And then if we come on to transparency and openness, as you know, in terms of where we work with MPH and very much my view, I totally echo what Councillor Harris said, that Scrutiny is a very valid tool and a welcome tool as far as I'm concerned. Hence, we look, for instance, at the MPH Task and Finish Group, which is working extremely well, in my belief. Improving transparency by making supporting policies equally accessible is extremely important. In addition, references to any future PRS reform will be reflected in any policy updates in line with the legislative changes. And it's important to note that the statutory requirements include the provision of written decisions and access to a formal review process, all of which will continue to be delivered in line with legal requirements. So I will come back to that little something at the moment, because I'd like to try and go back to some of the individual points raised by my colleagues. Coming back to, I've made some notes here as well, and I would welcome perhaps if Antonio or Jodie would step in, because the depth of knowledge is there. Give me 1 second, Chair. Councillor Keeble, in terms of the considerations we were looking at, yes, this is a town that's vibrant and welcomes migration, and we are looking to obviously increase employment, and we are trying to be, as far as we can, economically successful. And supply of labour is critical. We're not looking to end the Northampton dream. We're looking for long-term real growth and end the loop in where people do not have that stability that allows them to build a life and a future in Northamptonshire. That's definitely not the aim at all. It is true, the comment, we won't solve the crisis with PRS or the public sector. We need to build more homes, and we need to get more homes, and we are working towards that. We have a demand of approximately 450 homeless cases at the moment, and 500 potentially coming on each month, and 670, I believe, approximately 670 in temporary accommodation. So the policy is, I don't think, is deficient. There is a legal challenge to write a review. The PRS rental use is done based on the usual tenure. But I would like, if I can, to ask Jodie just to explain a little bit of those comments regarding Councillor Keeble's, in terms of tenure and things according to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So in relation to private rented sector, it absolutely wouldn't be the default position in any discharge of any duty in relation to homelessness. It just gives wider and additional options for people where private rented sector is an affordable option following an affordability assessment. We do currently discharge into the private rented sector, and we do support that process, and we have got private sector landlords engaged with our private sector housing team to absolutely undertake that process. In addition to that, equally, suitability is absolutely critical. So when we're assessing somebody's vulnerability, we look at schooling, we look at SEND cases, we look at education needs, hospital treatment, all of that is taken into account to ensure that the vulnerabilities are absolutely met and that we can safeguard that accommodation. The whole purpose of discharge of a homeless duty is around sustainability and wanting to ensure that those individuals, those families move into different secure accommodation in the sector, whether that be through social housing, housing associations, private renter sector, and that's in a sustainable position for those people to be in. Just going through some further notes that I'd made. In relation to the private renters sector as well, obviously we've got the Renters' Rights Act that came in recently, and that gives people in the private rented sector assured tenure. So it's different to the way that it would have been previously. Landlords can't do no-fault evictions anymore. They cannot evict Section 21. They have to follow a Section 8 process to undertake that eviction. If a landlord operates outside of that legislation, then our private rented housing team take enforcement action in relation to that landlord. So we've got a robust process to ensure that the landlords that we are engaging with are absolutely checked from a credentials point of view and are wanting to work with the local authority and with the council.
I was going to ask.
And do you want to come in? Yeah.
Some of the things that have been said are very different from what's on paper. The policy document says in paragraph 4.6 that the private rented sector would be the primary route for discharging homelessness duties. This isn't about just one amongst a number of options. This is about saying it's the primary route. And that is a whole different ballgame. This isn't just about, nicely just looking at things like we're doing already. This is a change. It says without consent. It also says it can be out of area placement. That is dramatically different from what is happening now. And it is also, if you look at it, now, at the hard edge of this type of policy, if you talk about established best practice, have a look at some of the councils that do have good practice. I've got a list here, and you can have a look at them, at what they actually do. And they aren't proposed in this policy document at all. I mean, just at the crudest level, when I looked at this, I did a word count on our policy document. It was something over 1,000 words. When I looked at Ealing, that was one of the first councils down this route, its policy document was over 5,000 words. Now, that gives you a kind of idea of the scale of the lack of detail which we have. So, it's not a strong framework. It's quite a weak framework. Now, it's fine to sit here and say, we'll look at this, we'll look at that, we'll look at the other. But when people come, if people are given a placement and they have to do a review, and they have to go for a review, if they then have to end up in court, and there's constant legal challenges to these all the time, there's a whole lot of cases going on. They have to go at what's on paper, what the words say. They can't go on what's been said in a committee meeting. Now, when you're an MP, what you say in the bill committee does have legal import. It can be taken to imply intent. But that, this is a council. It's a different ballgame. People have to go by what's on paper, and if it's not on paper, it doesn't exist. And one of my concerns is that the policy documents that it refers to are not findable. They're not searchable. I've looked through the internet and you simply can't find them. Things like the placements policy that would be critical for people to know what's happening. And there's also a muddle here between legislation and policy. Of course, this is within the framework of legislation, but that's wholly different from a worked out policy of a council being something which is reasonable and workable and proof against legal challenge. If somebody goes to assert their individual personal rights, they might say, the council's policy can have this, that, and the other, and then somebody might say, well, actually, this is what happened to me, and it's not, it doesn't, the policy that's down there doesn't cover me, or the council hasn't followed its policy. So you can't say just because it's capable of being legal, therefore it provides a strong, robust framework against legal challenge. The finance is essential. So if we're having a stronger financial statement, why wasn't that put in for the Cabinet to look at? What on earth?
I think I'm going to ask Jodie and Antonio and Charlie to come back in.
Okay, well, I'll keep my other remarks for later.
Before you go on, thank you.
Because it is, there's no point. If at scrutiny stuff is coming out that should have been considered at Cabinet, it should go back to Cabinet and they should sort it out before it comes out.
This is what the call-in is about, obviously, whether it goes back to Cabinet or whether we just decide to take no further action. We have clarified that already in the reports we have. So I'll just invite Charlie, Councillor Hastie, and the officers to come back in.
No.
Yes.
In our constitution, the member who has called in a decision has the right to sit as a member of the committee and therefore has the right to speak. What the member who's made the call in cannot do is vote as a member of the committee.
That's right.
So I would respectfully
Can't write.
request that you give Councillor Keeble the same courtesy that you give any other member of your committee. Thank you.
Councillor Ware, I just want to address you in saying that I have heard Councillor Keeble, and she has had permission to speak, but it is a long speech which she wants to give us. Some points we already do know, we are fully aware of as the committee, and I just want to give opportunity before Councillor Keeble carries on for Councillor Hastie and our officers to come in with any relevant points. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in regards, I think I did clarify. I wouldn't say it's a typo, but it is a mistake, and I can give you assurance that 4.6 is, it will be changed to the head of cabinet, that it will not be the primary route, 100%. And also, we're looking at, we do discharge out of area already. Some people want to relocate, and we support that. So we do relocate out of area already. Jodie, on that point or any other point, that current point, you need to add on 4.6 or the out of area.
Yeah, just in relation to the out of area, again, absolutely need to be crystal clear. It is around suitability, it is around affordability, 100%, and vulnerability. So we wouldn't discharge out of area unless there was consent with the customer that we're working with to discharge out of area. And that would be within their agreement. Obviously, as we've set out, and we've absolutely been clear, there's routes in relation to the judicial review process and equally the ombudsman process. So we need to make sure that we are making the right decision for our customers, again, to provide that sustainability long-term for those individuals and those families. I think Antonio might want to add something.
Okay, Chair, there's a few other points, because now what we're hearing...
Chair, sorry, 1 second.
Going to invite...
If you, with your permission, if Antonio could step in.
Okay, yes, yep.
Sorry, we're swapping microphones around.
I've just been listening to comments in relation to kind of the affordability, but also the vulnerability aspects, which I think has been mentioned throughout. So as part of our existing processes, and again this is governed under the Housing Act 1996, and again in line with our Homelessness Code of Guidance for Local Authorities, which is published. In addition to the affordability aspects, we also do vulnerability assessments, again risk assessing all aspects of risk, threat, harm, vulnerability, for example, domestic abuse and things of that nature as well. So as part of them assessment processes, we'll only offer and look at securing accommodation that is suitable for, the individual's needs as a whole, looking at all them different aspects, including medical and welfare needs as well, and that's all a part of existing establishments and frameworks that are already in place. So again, this is just opening and providing that opportunity to look at the private rented sector accommodation when it's suitable and appropriate, and again, not intended to disadvantage any groups or vulnerable people where the private rented sector may not be appropriate.
Could I come back and finish on my points? Because what we're actually hearing now is a completely different policy. Whereas before we had a policy that was where private rental sector was a primary route for discharging homelessness without consent, out of area. We're now got a policy which is private rented sector, maybe as a variety of things it might be considered, with consent only. And, yes, if people want to move, they can. Well, moving in the social housing sector is unbelievably difficult. And I'm sure that if you told people here that the council was going to help them move if they wanted to, you might find you had a stampede at your doors, because that's a whole different ballgame. What's in the paper is private sector as a primary route of discharge, including for the main homeless duty, without consent, absolutely clear, and outside the area without an area said, and it doesn't say that this is an option that people can move if they want to. We've also heard that the financial statement in the report wasn't adequate, and that needs to go back and be considered as well. So we've also got issues about the 12-month review that we've heard about, without knowing who that's going to come to, because there is mention of a review there, but it's for a tactical housing group, and I don't know who the tactical housing group is, but it ought to be actually by this scrutiny. And we've also now heard that there's a muddle about the level of security in tenure, because one of the main reasons why people like social housing is because they have security of tenure. They like it even more when they can buy their property. And I bet you there'll be a big uproar when the Labour government starts to reduce people's right to buy housing, because actually buying Councillor Packer must know, because particularly in the Eastern District, people move up from London.
Could you stick to the topic, please?
I am.
Thank you.
I am. I'm talking about the security of tenure and the importance of it, particularly here. Security of tenure does not apply in the private rented sector. It's absolutely right that the Renters' Right Act has improved things somewhat, that you can't have a no-fault eviction. But it still does not provide security of tenure, and you still find people being evicted for all kinds of reasons, and that is one of the real concerns. If you look at the practice of out-of-area placements, that people find themselves in homeless or evicted, and they're living hundreds of miles away or 100 miles away from where they came from. So that absolutely is a key factor, and it is also probably, whilst the Renters' Rights Act is a step in the right direction, it doesn't make a private rented sector property anywhere like comparable with social housing in security of tenure or in cost as well. And that you still haven't dealt with the issue about what you're going to do to support people in finding the difference between the between the local housing allowance and the market rent. And there's a final point too, which when you're making the assessment, and this was my point in it, at the outset, what are you going to do about who you choose to move out of area? Because there's two groups of people. One are people who are vulnerable, and as I said, there's 17% of West Northants homeless people who are vulnerable because they have a disability or a long-term illness. There's also a lot of people, 26%, who are in full or part-time work. And there's a real issue. You can disadvantage people if they're vulnerable because they're away from their care needs. You can disadvantage them if they're sons and daughters because they're away from family support. But you can also disadvantage them if you move them from here to Doncaster and they're in work, because they might get a home, but they then end up without a job, and that is really serious. And the point about the assessment criteria is that what people need to know is how you're going to balance up those different pressures, who's going to get priority and who's likely to be moved.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor Charlie Hastie to come in. Thank you.
Chair, all due respect, we're now going around in circles, and we're starting to get, I think we are, in my opinion. We're also going into a wider domain as well. What I would like to say is, I've acknowledged the 4.6 about that's changed. That will be in the Cabinet paper. The other thing is, we're looking at, for instance, the level of detail in this paper is if this is rewriting our whole policy across all aspects of homelessness. This is supplemental to, not replacing. This also doesn't reflect, the comments I don't think reflects what I believe is that the genuine people the housing officers are, and that the real desire is not to do anything to harm or to prejudice people with vulnerabilities. It's very much about giving us an additional route to find housing in the private rental sector. And you talk about affordability. Well, if they fail the affordability calculations, they couldn't be put into the private rental. They'll have to come back into our own internal solutions. So what I'm trying to say is this is not about trying to get rid of people, move people out of area, disadvantage, be in any way discriminatory against anyone to do with SEND, vulnerabilities. All of the assessment criteria that we do, that the officers here do absolutely diligently, I genuinely believe, and when it goes wrong, it's addressed, it's raised, and I think Councillor Keeble would know that we've worked on some cases together where things do drop through. But the view of all the officers here is quite the opposite of what we're hearing from the other councillors, which is to say that there isn't a duty of care, there isn't a care of care, and that I firmly believe this provides additional avenues for us to explore rather than superseding our whole policy. The whole policy is about looking after our residents to the best that we can do given the constraints we have with housing. This is one avenue, one tool to be added onto it, and I genuinely believe it's the right way to progress, and I don't believe it's got quite the, shall we say, odorous connotations that are being implied about maybe discharging our duties because there isn't that level of care. That level of care, I assure you, is there.
Could you just, for the sake of the committee and people listening in at home, could you just clarify the whole policy, please, Councillor Hastie?
Can I?
Just clarify what it is, not go into great details. You mentioned the whole policy. Thank you.
Okay. Let me attempt to do that. That's an interesting. Do you want me to? Well, if you could do it more eloquently, which I'm sure you can. Excuse my lack of should we say, brevity on it. So if it's all right through you, Chair, can Jodie address this?
I think it was alluding to the reference around we already have certain policies within Housing Solutions. So
oh, I'm sorry, Chair. I thought you were talking about this policy. I thought, yeah. Carry on, though, anyway.
So, yes, we absolutely do. This policy is something that we are bringing forward because the work that's already going on, that's already identified in the policy, already happens. So this is about ensuring that we have a robust policy framework across housing solutions that is transparent. So this isn't a change in practice. Yes, we will bolster our relationship with the private renter sector to ensure that we've got those avenues to discharge our duty to private renter sector, but absolutely to caveat only where that assessment of suitability, affordability and vulnerability is absolutely checked and challenged within the service. We would not discharge to any private rented sector solution where we could not guarantee the affordability of those people entering. So if there was a gap in relation to local housing allowance, for example, we would not legally discharge the affordability element of that assessment because that accommodation wouldn't be suitable. So we already have policies and procedures and processes across housing solutions. This is just about being transparent and open around our additional work that we want to take forward with the private renter sector. I hope that clarifies that, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any? Oh, Councillor Hastie.
Yeah, apologies to the Chair and colleagues. You know, I thought you were asking me to summarise the policy that we had just been going through at length. I didn't realise you wanted support about the overall policy.
No, it was just to clarify what the whole policy was. Sorry if I wasn't clear.
I thought I was going to have to start all over again.
No, not at all. Okay. Okay, Councillor Keeble.
Thank you. I would just come back because what we're hearing now is very different from what's in the paper, but also in relation to what is happening in other housing authorities and what the sort of seen results of this kind of policy are. Because this is in a way, as I say, it's at the harder edge, but it's recognisable as a out-of-area placement, private rented sector discharge policy. That's what it is. It's part of that ballpark. And if you look at the way that policy has impacted elsewhere and the results of it, it has led in some unexpected costs to councils, for example, in having to bridge the gap in relation to the difference between the local housing allowance and the market rent. It has led to people being placed out of area and then finding that the tenancy doesn't work out and they get stuck or they have to be brought back. There's a whole lot of issues around that. There are issues about vulnerability. I think what makes Northamptonshire different, West Northants different, is that we have a higher than average percentage of people who are homeless who are in work. And that makes it very different because there you seriously have to make sure that people can maintain their work. And that's a factor that we haven't heard about, but it's seen that those things happen. So I think it's really important that, if I could just say, yes, I think it's really important that if the policy is going to be hugely changed, if it's accepted that the financial sector isn't right, if the wording of it is going to change so it's not so that the private rented sector isn't going to be the primary route, then that needs to be changed. It is a cabinet paper. It's been through cabinet already. And if there are vulnerability assessments that should be there, then those criteria need to be set out, because what will matter to the people who are affected is, and the policy will be continue for some time, will be what the wording is and what their rights are under that and how they can expect to be treated. So if there's all those changes to be made, it really should be changed and go back so everyone can see very clearly what is being signed up to.
Thank you. I think, obviously, in the policy itself, you talked about vulnerability. In 6.3, it does mention about affordability, medical needs, be it quite briefly, but this is version 1 of the policy: disabilities, safeguarding, support needs, employment, and ability to sustain a tenancy. So it does cover those areas, but obviously the detail is not such in what we're seeing. But it does touch upon those in the protected characteristics in the Cabinet report. So one would hope that obviously from the Cabinet report into the actual policy, that is reflected, I do believe. But now, Councillor Hastie, to come back.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate, I want to make quite clear that this does not supersede, replace our existing policies. This is an addition to the assessments and how we do assessments of vulnerability and how we go about doing that. More than happy to share that. There is a level of care, I think, that is exemplary. This is just an extra tool, an extra policy that sits above all the other policies in housing and homelessness in the council already. It's an addition to, not a replacement of. I want to make that very clear, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the committee now if we have any points of discussion and also questions. Oh, lots of hands. And I didn't see who was first. I think it was Councillor Ashraf, so please go ahead. Thank you.
Can we just make sure all our microphones are working first before putting our hands up, please? Thank you.
Shall I switch mine off, Scott? Because is that what's stopping?
Chair, with the committee's permission, I just asked to get a glass of water. I've got a bit of a cough at the minute, and I'm sure I'm going to need some.
If anybody needs a glass of water, you don't need permission.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, we've heard a lot of discussions and concerns, and obviously there is a relevance for the decision to bring it back to Cabinet for consideration. If we are to defer approval of the private rented sector discharge policy, pending a full scrutiny review of the policy, I do have a couple of points I'd like to bring to the table. A properly costed, I'm sure this has been covered, properly costed financial analysis of the policy, including quantified savings and projections, an enhanced equality impact assessment addressing specifically the impact on households with protected characteristics, a defined maximum distance threshold and clear criteria for what constitutes a reasonably practical in-area placement, and full disclosure of the West Northamptonshire policy and procedure documents referred to in the report, and of the regulatory standards and mechanisms in existence in private sector housing. I've got more details expanding on those 5 points, which I will be able to forward to you. I didn't want to go over it again because it may have been covered, but those are a few of the points that I wanted to bring to the table. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to invite Councillor Heron next.
Oh, thank you. Not to be too political, as we were told off, but part of the reason, and it states in the policy, that there is an exponential rise in the people arriving as homeless or at risk of homelessness, is because of the Renters' Right Act. And the private landlords are running for the hills. So I don't know where they think these private landlords are going to be. And that's something that we haven't discussed as to how much access they've got in the locality, or if they're going to go out of area, how do they actually did they discuss it with other local councils who've probably got the same problems as we have? How do they assess whether they are of decent home standards? How do they hand over any social problems to that local council because they're then out of area? And as you said, if they have to come back in a year's time, have they lost that local connection, which will mean that they can't register as homeless? I think the whole thing, we're trying to look at this policy on the hoof, and I think it's disrespectful to the constitution of having a proper scrutiny committee. I think it was the wrong decision to not have pre-decision scrutiny. I think certainly in respect to our newer councillors, the housing law is very complex, and I know that our housing officers work incredibly hard, but they don't have the resources. They're both in having enough people to look at every individual case. I was involved in lots of different cases where they tried to find the right accommodation, but it's a brutal policy. You get one offer, you refuse it because it's not suitable to you, and if we legally regard it as suitable, then that's it. You're on the streets. You're on your own. I mean, we had issues like a disabled man with an assistance dog put on the top floor of a block of flats with the lift broken, for instance. Another one with a woman who was caring for her mentally handicapped son, aged 24, having to share a bedroom with her 9-year-old daughter. You know, there were lots of cases that seemed nonsensical, but we had abided by the actual letter of the law. And I think it's really important that this is actually brought back for some proper scrutiny with workshop type style, so we can actually allow councillors to actually understand the policy, where we're coming from. I do not understand why there's any haste in this, because frankly, what's happening in Westminster is going to change the whole landscape of this issue, I think. And so I do not understand, since you say there's no actual change or barely any change, what's the rush? I think there's time for it to come back and actually be discussed with the Scrutiny Committee properly, for us all to understand the issues, and then for it to go back to Cabinet. But I think you might find that actually the whole landscape of housing has changed by then, after the summer. Thank you.
Could I just add to that? If this was to be referred back to the Cabinet, what time frame would we be looking at? And also the implications of that, please, Councillor Hastie.
Time frame would have to be look at the forward plan. I don't know when that would be able to come through again. Given the fact we're entering into the towards summer recess, I'd probably respectfully request if James Edmonds might have an input on that. Obviously, if things are going to have to be bumped, things may have to be bumped. And the implications of this is, yes, there are potentially quite big changes coming in Westminster, but with all due respect to Councillor Herring, we can't anticipate what the current government is going to do with legislation. And what also concerns me is, once again, I reiterate, this is supplementary to, not replacing of the policies. But it is, delays will prohibit us and probably will end up costing council money, and also possibly us making the wrong decisions, although everyone here seems to think that's our intent. I can assure everyone 100% this is about adding a tool, not making it more difficult. And if we start bringing in things like Renters' Rights Act like that, there's an awful lot of changes, and we're already engaged with private landlords, some of whom are actually more likely to engage with us because of the changes to renters' rights, because they recognise that local government tenancies are more assured. So, in terms of timing, I think it's an unacceptable delay. It isn't done in haste, I assure you. It is a question of fact, but I also can't predict what changes will come from Westminster. I mean, quite frankly, who can at the moment in this tumultuous sort of time? But if I may refer to James about the working forward plan on Cabinet, it'll be after summer, I would have thought.
Well, through you, Chair, I mean, I think if the if the committee was to decide to do exactly what the call-in request calls for, which is talking about pending a full scrutiny review of the policy. Now, the definition of a full scrutiny review is usually seen as something that may run for several task and finish panel meetings, a period of probably months. So that would have a bearing on when the decision could be brought back to Cabinet.
Sorry, can I?
Yes, Councillor Aldridge.
Thank you. I just want to say, to begin with, from my perspective, the purpose of a call-in is not to delay decision-making or to frustrate Cabinet or the administration. It is about strengthening decisions through effective scrutiny. And we have had some really good policies come to this committee during the development stage, and they're fantastic. So, for example, we've got the youth strategy, to name but one. I was really disappointed with this particular policy. I understand that we're talking about an addendum, but the addendum is there to ensure that there is consistency, clarity, there is accessibility, there's transparency. So it would seem to me that if we did address some of the areas that Councillor Hastie himself has recognised could be strengthened further, and some of the work that I know that officers are involved in, but is not reflected in this policy, then aren't we better off giving it the time and taking it back and doing the work? And yes, I understand the timeline, but we don't have to stick to a bureaucratic timeline. We could look at speeding the process up and actually moving this forward, because I recognise it's an important area, but it's insufficient at the moment. The paper that I saw has got massive gaps, and a number of speakers have already highlighted those, so I don't intend going through there, through all of those. But the issue around questions about disabled residents, care leavers, victims of domestic abuse, the issues about what happens to families and children, the issues about financial implication, and the big issue around what happens if private sector rents increase, you know, during the process. There are a whole host of questions that I've got here, and I think we need to really, as a scrutiny committee, take it back, have a look at it, try and do it speedily. And I think, James, that leaves you with a bit of a challenge in terms of getting that sorted. But let's strengthen it. We've got something on paper. We could make it much better, and it should be of the quality and standard of some of the other committee policy papers that I've seen from the council. This is not strong enough, in my view. It's got big gaps, and it could be strengthened much further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a point about the nuance of the relationship between Cabinet and scrutiny, it wouldn't be appropriate for Cabinet to command scrutiny that it should be looking at something. So I think, and I accept this is captured in the call-in notice, effectively, if the Scrutiny Committee was to resolve to refer the matter back to Cabinet so that more scrutiny could take place, you would not be asking Cabinet to agree to that scrutiny so much as asking Cabinet to put the matter on hold to allow a gap for scrutiny to take place. And as I say, it is captured in the call-in request, which talks about Cabinet deferring approval of the policy pending a scrutiny review. So I think it's important to highlight that nuance. If you were referring it back to Cabinet so that more scrutiny could take place, in effect you would be asking Cabinet to agree to put a hold on the decision so that the scrutiny could then take place. You wouldn't be asking Cabinet to agree that scrutiny takes place, because it wouldn't be appropriate for Cabinet to be telling scrutiny what it should be doing in that respect.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Councillor Aldridge. I could only say that once again we're coming back to subjects we've covered which are not intended to be covered by this policy, because they do not supersede our existing policy, our duty of care, in care for vulnerability in general across the spectrum, whether it be SEND, disabilities or whatever. This is not rewriting that policy. This policy doesn't need to be brought back to scrutiny to then look at our existing policies about how we care and how we assess, whether it be affordability, vulnerability, disability, SEND, or whatever. This does not supersede the existing policies that work well in this council. If you want to bring it back to scrutiny, to then start layering on other facets in terms of, does this cover on its own, affordability, accessibility, all the other issues that we seem to be honing into as if we're abandoning all of our current policies and standards, then you wouldn't be scrutinising this paper. You'd be scrutinising the entire council's housing policy. And that's not what this call-in is all about. This call-in is about this paper and this paper alone.
Yes. You can respond, yes.
Thank you, Chair. It isn't about turning everything upside down, Councillor Hastie. It is about appropriate reference and sufficient detail in this policy so that it is clear and it's transparent and it has the information in that is required for residents, for us all to understand, to have a point of reference if there was a legal challenge for us. At the moment, it does not actually stand up to external scrutiny. It has got big gaps in there. So it's about some detail. I'm not talking about turning everything upside down. It is about providing sufficient information, because in the end, whether it's an addendum or not, it is a policy document and policies matter within councils. So we need to get it right.
Chair, sorry, Councillor. Chair, I don't know when we're going to start speculating on external scrutiny on this paper, which is a WNC paper. So I don't know whether you could be, what external scrutiny are we going to start bringing to this table?
Sorry, just to clarify that, Councillor Hastie, I don't mean external scrutiny from some body. I mean external scrutiny if there was a particular case that was challenged out there. We're not strong enough at the moment with this policy.
Sure.
Okay.
Chair, could I just come back on the point? Because, I mean, there's been quite a lot of discussion about the gaps, which is absolutely right. And the gaps are important because those are what people need to understand the decisions that are being made about their housing. And I completely agree with the points about the impact of the renters' rights, which might not be quite the panacea that everybody thinks it is, and the points that were made there about people being left stranded. But I think one of the other things is that now we're left with a policy which is very short, only 1,000 words, just over, and it's also had the central bits of it removed here, but not clearly said. But they've not been, removed in the wording, because the thrust of this was that the private rental sector was being used as a primary route of discharge, and now we're told it's not, and it's definitely not. So which is it? And I think it's absolutely right that we should be really clear about that, because otherwise the next route is it goes off to council. And what are we agreeing? Are we agreeing that it is the primary route first, or it isn't? The finances, we've been told, also aren't clear, and that's a key part of the call-in, because there is an issue about the finances of housing. I think everybody who deals with housing understands that, and understands that there's some real implications with whatever decision it takes. And with the out-of-area placements, this is clear about how it's got a commitment on the use of out-of-area placements, and now we're told that that is just all part of the general thing. So
yes.
I think we're not, we need absolute clarity about the policy. And
I think we have addressed this already, Councillor Keeble. We seem to be going round a bit in circles. Okay. I'm going to hand over to James now.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a further factor for you to take into account in your decision making. So what the Constitution says about the outcomes that can result from a call-in are the committee decides that it refers the matter back to the decision-making body, setting out in writing the nature of its concerns and any alternative recommendations, or the committee decides to take no further action, in which case the original decision becomes effective immediately. In relation to the first of those points, so the councillors who've signed the call-in request have identified their concerns about the decision and have suggested a course of action that they would like to see as a result. I don't think the committee has a binary choice between doing exactly what the call-in request says or taking no further action. The committee could identify that, yes, it has concerns about the original decision, which may be some, all, or none of the points raised in the call-in request, and may be additional things that the committee identifies. But and then when referring it back, the committee could identify things that it wanted to see happen, which may not be only the things identified in the call-in request. So it's not, the choice before you is not, you can only refer it back on and with the recommendation that the actions set out in the call-in request is what happens, or you can decide that no further action is taken. The committee does have the option of referring it back and identifying actions that are different from what is included in the call-in request.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add to that obviously we have heard about the wording and obviously the wording of this being a primary tool for PRS discharge policy, and that I think obviously I know you've said this, Charlie Hasty, but I would say that maybe the wording there needs to be, this is one tool, this is a primary tool, but what we are looking at here is the prevention and the relief of homelessness as a committee. That is what we are. If we narrow it down to be very narrow, that is what we are looking at. So this is a valid tool, but I think as the committee have concerns about some of the wording, I'm going to pass over to
main housing duty.
Yes, I'm going to pass over to Councillor Pindon Shahan now.
Thank you, Chair. This policy paper is actually really close to my heart. I faced homelessness as a teenager after my father lost his business, so I'm probably one of the people that have experienced this directly. And that's why, this policy has to be really, really clear in the way it's delivered. I know the Cabinet member mentioned that it's an addition and not a replacement of the policies, and but what I think what the issue is when you're listening to everyone in this room is there's no clarity, there's no transparency, it's not very clear, and it's going to be open to misinterpretation by officers. So I don't know whether I'm sure you have dealt with queries when it comes to the public, but they literally go by word. Word by word is what they will follow. There's not that kind of grey area and looking at the human interpretation. I had a lady who had severe anxiety issues, and she had a cat with her, and the policy said you couldn't have any pets, and the woman ended up homeless, and because she wanted to keep her cat. But there was none of that, empathy from officers, and I'm sorry to be so blunt, but this is what happened. There was no empathy in around that, because the policy just didn't allow for that movement. So I think this isn't being political. This is not trying to, this is a very human thing. We are looking at people's lives and how it will impact them, and how there is some clarity that's required here. So I think for me, it's looking at the risks that are going to come from this policy, how clear it is to deliver for officers when they are dealing with people who will have all kinds of various reasons for experiencing homelessness, that they're able to be addressed. We're here. We're not just here to pass a policy and to make sure that the policies are passed in a timely manner. We're here to serve residents who will be going through all kinds of issues, and to ensure that we protect those residents as well. And that's what we've been elected for overall. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Shahan. I don't have your direct experience of homelessness, but I have certainly been around enough of it in my travels around the world. So the thing is, there is flexibility that could be incorporated in this, but you're asking for clarity, but then you're asking for flexibility. I don't know how you can put into a paper all the different possible connotations of let me just finish, Councillor John. So we are looking at that. You've got the situation where you can already have pets in private rental sector. That's part of the Renters' Rights Act that's changed. There is flexibility, but we can't actually put it into words, into documentation about all different connotations that are going to be covered. So, and also, I do ask the committee to consider the fact that the officers here, now, there can be mistakes and omissions made, but they are not in the business of making life worse for our residents in any way, shape, size. I know you're not. I know. Sorry, Councillor Sharon. I know you're not saying that. I'm reiterating the committee that I want the committee to be very clear that all the officers that I've come across, their overall goal is the best outcome for the residents. This is not designed to be some form of quick fix that gets them less work. So I'd ask the committee to remember that. And also your response, Councillor Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, just very, very quickly on that. And this isn't, this. I'm just sharing direct experience of cases that have come to the council. And again, this isn't to be difficult. I don't think anyone sitting on this committee is trying to be difficult or wants to delay any policy or anything like that. I think all we're asking for is to have a policy that's really, really clear, so we can, the officers can understand it, all the councillors can understand it, and we can explain it to our residents. That's all that's required here. And unfortunately, it's not what it says. I know what you're saying, it's in addition to, but it's almost like then we've got two kind of policies that are just not aligned. It almost feels that way. And that's my interpretation of reading these. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to be drawing this to a close shortly, but there are 3 other councillors that wish to speak. So first of all, we'll have Councillor...
I'll go last.
Okay, we'll have Councillor Ron Furman, then we will go over to Councillor Eastwood and Councillor Packer, and then I will be asking for a proposal for... we have Councillor Cameron Emery, and you will... Well, we're having everybody come forward. Last one will be Councillor Sue Gaskill. So that's 5 councillors that will speak, and then I will be asking for a proposal for resolution and a seconder and taking it to the vote. Thank you.
I don't want to hear myself. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I've looked at other councils for comparison, and it is noticeable that many of them, such as Oxford, Lambeth and others, do not include detailed financial modelling with their PRS policies either. So I do not think it is unusual that this document does not go into that level of financial detail, as it's a framework rather than a financial business case. My concern would actually be the opposite. If we do not adopt the policy like this, we risk limiting the tools available to us at a time when pressures are clearly increasing. I wouldn't suggest for a moment that we don't scrutinise this, far from it. We absolutely should, particularly as the policy is implemented and the financial impacts become clearer. But in the context, I think the bigger financial risk is not having sufficient flexibility to respond. At some point, it becomes a question of acting now or limiting the options available to the communities we represent. But when we actually step back and look at the bigger picture, the question becomes, if we don't adopt the policy, how restrictive does it make us as a council representing our residents? We already have policies and safeguards in place to protect people, and I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that. One of my concerns, and I'm sure we've all heard examples of this, is the risk historically of families being split due to lack of suitable accommodation. Even where we don't have firm data, that is a real-world issue that does arise. If we don't act, we risk those kinds of vulnerabilities continuing or even increasing, particularly as overnight and temporary accommodation becomes more scarce with rising demand and cost. This policy, for me, provides an alternative. It gives us more options, and in situations like this, having more options is critical. I absolutely welcome further scrutiny, particularly once the policy is in operation. But I would be concerned if we didn't act now and in doing so reduce our ability to offer safe, suitable accommodation to some of the most vulnerable residents in West Northamptonshire. When I've looked at other councils, this approach is already being used. It's working elsewhere, and we would not be acting in isolation by taking this step. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to go straight to Councillor Eastwood next, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak. I'm a sub on this committee tonight, and probably normally I would say absolutely nothing, although you all know that I can talk. However, I actually feel passionately about this, and I was slightly amazed. I thought it might be rather a dull affair. It hasn't been. But when this addendum was presented to the Cabinet, it obviously didn't hold water. We have 4 members in our audience who are eminent members of our chamber, and the details appear to be missing. To quote Councillor Keeble, there are holes. Therefore, I would suggest this is reviewed, scrutiny is done. We all know it will take time. But if we are to get it right, for our constituents, the devil is in the detail. Come on, let's go back for clarification.
Thank you. And to go over to Councillor Emery now, please.
So having listened to the discussion and considering the report, I'm satisfied that the policy provides the Council with an additional tool to meet its statutory homelessness duties in the context of rising demand and limited social housing supply. The policy includes suitability assessments, review rights for applicants, and compliant checks on properties. I also note the potential benefits of reducing reliance on temporary accommodation, which are extremely costly, and enabling housing officers to focus more time on homelessness prevention and supporting households in need, rather than managing prolonged temporary accommodation placements. On that basis, I don't consider there are sufficient grounds to refer the decision back to Cabinet, and I would support the committee taking no further action in respect to the calling. Acknowledging what Keith said earlier, I just want assurance that families, particularly with SEND children, are considered i.e. not move far from their school, which could incur extra costs and also be extremely distressing.
Thank you. Right, we're going to go to Councillor Gaskill.
Through you, Chair. The one thing that does really concern me is if we delay this by deferring it back to Cabinet, are we at serious risk of losing the private landlords that we've already got on board?
That's a very poignant point. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to final point is from Councillor Councillor Scott Packer.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. We've heard from the Cabinet member that 4.6 will be reworded in the effect of making clear that PRS will not be the primary route, and therefore I propose that we take no further action on this call-in. Thank you.
Can I have, can somebody second that, please? Okay, Councillor John East has seconded that. So we will take this to the vote.
Chair, can I just ask one question quickly? If the wording's going to be changed, what will it be? What will the wording be?
That will be for the committee to decide, and this will be for the that will be. Yeah, that will be for the Cabinet, surely, to come back to work with the officers.
It would have to go back to Cabinet then.
Chair? Chair?
Yes.
I can assure you that the change will be that it won't be the primary route, it'll just be one of the routes, but also I've got delegated authority to decide on the route taken. If we go down this route, I can exercise that right.
Okay, so what you are saying is that this will be one tool that will help to relieve homelessness.
And will that be with consent or without consent? That was the other issue he said would be.
Absolutely. Sorry, Chair. Chair.
So through you, Chair, we've had a proposal that's been seconded, which is that the committee takes no further action. And
yes, so we will take that to the vote now. So can we, all those that are in favour that the committee does not refer this back to the Cabinet, could you raise your hands, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm going to reserve my vote for the moment. And can we have those that are not in favour of that, please? 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4, 5. We don't have any abstentions.
Well, you've effectively abstained, Chair.
Yes. Well, I am actually I said I'd reserve my vote, so I can take the vote. Can I take the vote now? Sorry, it's not very conventional.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we've heard what we've heard, and I feel that with the duty of care that the council has to residents and the fact that this is all about the prevention and the relief of homelessness, I'm going to vote to not take this back to Cabinet. No further action. So that proposal is carried. Thank you.
And I do find it quite objectionable that the members across the floor have read pre-prepared statements.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no point in having a debate, is there? Because it's all been pre-prepared.
So we haven't finished our meeting. We've just finished item 5, which is the call-in. We now will move on to item 6, which is our committee work programme for this year going into 2027.
Chair, with your permission, myself and the officers leave.
Yes,
Thank you,
that's
Chair.
absolutely fine. Thank you for your valuable input.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first meeting of the committee for the civic year. So it needs to think about its work programme for the year ahead.
James, sorry, I think we're leaving the meeting because I don't think there's any point in us discussing the programme going ahead because everything just goes through anyway. This is not a proper scrutiny committee. It's just voted on. There's pre-prepared speeches and this isn't a proper debate.
Sorry, Councillor, but we've been here for 2 hours. We have debated this. We've listened to everything everyone has said. If you're not willing to accept that, then that is your prerogative.
I think that we will carry on this meeting. You have the reasonable right to leave, but, you know, we will have a work programme that maybe you haven't committed to or commented on. But you are welcome to write to me with any issues or areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just as a point of information, the quorum for a scrutiny committee, the scrutiny committee meeting of 11 members is 3 members. So even with those members who've chosen to depart, I can confirm the meeting is still quorate. And so to deal with the item, as the first committee meeting in the civic year, it needs to think about its work programme for the year ahead. Both the items the topics that go into it, but also the different working methods that the committee might apply to particular areas of work, and the timing of topic areas, and all that with a view to directing the Scrutiny Committee's attention and resources at those areas where it can make most difference, where it can add most value to the operation of the Council and to the interests of our West Northamptonshire residents. So the committee had an informal work programme planning meeting earlier this month to have give additional views on potential topics that may go in the work programme. The paper at page 35 onwards is intended to capture the outcomes of that. So you will see in there some items of recurring business, of regular business, some items that would be brought to a single committee meeting, and some broader topic areas where which may be subjects for in-depth scrutiny, but before commencing would need further consideration or to narrow down a reasonable, a worthwhile scope, and to think about timing. And then some areas running particularly on page 37, where again the committee's identified potential topics, but without necessarily being able to plug those into a particular committee meeting at this stage. And there is also a piece of work from last year on the progress of with in-housing Northamptonshire Partnership Homes, housing stock and services, where the committee is asked to take a view about whether that continues or not. So in addition, since the paper was produced and the agenda papers published, there's been an additional topic, potential topic that's been highlighted, which is around having an item at the committee meeting on the 8th of September on pre-decision scrutiny of a new council private sector enforcement policy. And indeed, arising out of the earlier agenda item, there was some suggestion of scrutinising the operation and impact of the private rented sector discharge policy. So what's presented with the agenda papers is emerged from an earlier discussion by committee members, but it's presented for you for consideration and at the meeting today, with a view to the committee arriving at a work programme that reflects its priorities and is directed at those areas where you can do most good. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, but otherwise it's over to the committee.
Okay, do we have any questions? Those of us that are left. No. I think really what you're saying, James, is some of these areas we need to obviously look at policies. We need to look at narrowing some of the issues down, to what we actually home in and what we actually scrutinise, because we can say we're going to look at for instance, we can say we're going to look at exclusions, school exclusions. That would be in line with Section 19 policy, which is from the Education Acts, where children are either, the council has a statutory duty if a child is excluded after 6 days, or if that Section 19 policy also includes the fact that if children are off school for 15 days for whatever reasons, they're not necessarily excluded or suspended, then there's a duty from WNC, the council, to provide a full-time education in the eyes of the law. And I think we need to be narrowing down some of these issues, and we need to also be, as we are and as we will continue to do, looking at what's going to impact the residents of West Northamptonshire and what's going to bring most positive, impactful change in terms of what recommendations we may make going forward to the Cabinet. Thank you.
So I think, Chair, if I could jump in. Yes. Yeah, I mean, there are some potential topics on here. Home to school transport, preparing for adulthood, for example, on page 37, where it may be relatively straightforward to make those a topic for discussion at a formal committee meeting. I'd contrast with that with support for young people not in education, employment or training, which was an area that members expressed a lot of interest in scrutinising when you had the discussion at the work programme planning event, but is, as set out there, is potentially a massive topic. That would be absolutely one where it would pay to identify a particular aspect, a particular focus area, and think about, and it might be one that's more suitable for in-depth scrutiny. So particularly if you're committing to set up a task and finish panel to spend weeks or months looking at it, it's important to get the scope right at the start.
Thank you, James. And the way we can do that is obviously by filling in the scrutiny proposal form A, which I believe we've all had emailed to us recently from James. Thank you.
It sounds as if there's not a lot of dissent been expressed to what's on the paper in front of the committee, and would the committee be agreeable to adding the pre-decision scrutiny of the private sector housing enforcement policy to that as well? That would be a topic for the September meeting.
Yes,
okay.
We are.
And I think it's worth saying too that the work programme, this is not something you get to consider once at the start of the year, set it all in stone, and then never review it again. Quite the opposite. I mean, members, you've been doing this for a year now. You will know that the work programme is reported to each scrutiny committee meeting. There is an opportunity to review it, add to it, take things out of it too, because you still, if you add something, you will still have the same amount of capacity. So it's almost a greater risk putting too much in the work programme at the start than having areas where you've identified a topic but not pinned it down to a particular meeting or a particular working approach. There's scope for it to be refined and developed further as you go through. So is support for young people not in education, employment or training something that the committee would see as something it wanted to focus on that might be the subject for an in-depth piece of work?
Councillor Gaskill, Councillor East.
It was something that, when I brought the subject up, that the head of Children's Trust, Melanie, I believe, Barnett, yeah, Children's Services, sorry, do apologise, that she was saying it is an area that we in Northampton do well, but obviously there are certain areas, which is what I'd like to be identified, that we could do better.
I was going to say about the preparing for adulthood as well, and especially with awareness of like SEND children as well. It's more difficult for them as they sort of approach that end of sort of school into sort of like a career thing. It's that sort of career path, and yeah, the opportunities available for them to do maybe supported volunteering or you know, other aspects like that. So again, that would be something that'd be worth looking at.
The SEND Priority Action Plan that actually highlights that as a priority,
right.
And it is something, it's that transition, particularly, well, for all children, but particularly those with SEND that might struggle, obviously that bit more. It is something that I have spoken to Councillor Bob Purser, who's the chair of the Adult Social Care Committee, and it's something, a piece of work we'd like to maybe do across
because it's a bit of a bridge between the two sort of like, is that stage where they become adults, but for the like, children of SEND, obviously they have that additional requirements. So.
Yeah, and I think an area there is, you know, going back to our committee and looking at children, is to start looking at that support maybe earlier than what it is, because I do know some cases where there has been gaps in EHCPs and whatnot into employment support, which is distressing and doesn't need to happen. So that's something we can certainly pick up on as a committee. Well, that concludes the meeting. Thank you, everybody. No, because I don't have any urgent business. Thank you.